The Atlanta Hawks lost to the New York Knicks 114-98, and this series is tied at 2-2. And I'm going to tell you guys why Jalen Johnson needs to step up, or else the Atlanta Hawks will not win this series against the New York Knicks. But before we get started on that, I want to tell you guys to hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share, and tell a friend, tell a family member, tell whoever to support my channel. And the Atlanta Hawks lost to the New York Knicks 114-98. And quite frankly, that game wasn't even that close. The Hawks got their butts kicked. They were dominated from start to finish. And look, man, this series is tied at 2-2. You know, after the Hawks won game 3, and we were all celebrating. Hawk fans were just strolling. We were hyped. We were excited. I was laughing at Stephen A. Smith on First Take, you know, ranting and complaining about how Mike Brown needs to get fired if the Hawks lose to the Atlanta Hawks, and how Miguel Bridges is paid too much money to have 0 points, and how the front office needs to get fired, and everybody needs to go, and the Hawks cannot lose to the Atlanta. He was just ranting and ranting and ranting. He was just pissed off, man. I tell you, Stephen A. Smith, he was on something, you know, just ranting about the New York Knicks, and I was enjoying it, and I was laughing my butt off, just laughing at this dude just ranting about the New York Knicks, because there's nothing better than the Knicks losing and seeing Stephen A. Smith pissed off. I'm here to tell y'all, people. It's the funniest thing in the world, seeing Stephen A. Smith rant about the New York Knicks. And I was enjoying it. And then the Knicks bounced back in game 4, and they just took it. And they got their get back against my Atlanta Hawks. They dominated the Hawks in game 4. You know, they were physical. They were more urgent. They forced the Hawks into 19 turnovers. The Hawks could not make a 3. I think they were like 9 for 41 or something like that from 3. So the Hawks could not make a 3. And nobody could get going. Jalen Johnson, and I'll get to him in a moment, he was not good. Dyson Daniels, in this game, it felt like his lack of shooting was a hindrance towards the Hawks. You know, Onyeka Okongwu, it felt like he just didn't have enough lift and burst. You know, it felt like nobody, Jonathan Kuminga struggled. Like nobody except CJ McCollum in the first half did much anything for the Hawks in this game. And it kind of brings me to the point that I made in the preview. And that's Jalen Johnson. Jalen Johnson, throughout this series, has not been good. Throughout this series, Jalen Johnson is averaging 19 points a game, 7 rebounds, 4 assists on 42% shooting and 29% from 3. Jalen Johnson just has not been good. And, you know, I want to talk about Jalen Johnson. I want to single him out because one of the concerns I had about this series for the Hawks was twofold. Number one was, how would they be able to handle the physicality of, the front court of Karl-Anthony Towns and Mitchell Robinson? Now, to the Hawks' credit, I think they put Mitchell Robinson in check. Like, he has not been a real factor in it for most of the series in ways that I feared that he would be. And so they deserve credit for holding them in check. But Karl-Anthony Towns is still a matchup problem for this team. And when the Knicks do go to him, which has not been a consistent feat in the series, but when they do go to him, he gives the Hawks problems because he's too big for anyone that the Hawks can have to guard him. And he's too quick and agile from Onyeka Okongwu. You know, and so he's been a real problem. But to the Hawks, you know, to the Knicks' detriment, they haven't consistently gone to him enough, which has been helping the Hawks. And so that was the concern I had about this series from a Hawks standpoint. And the other concern that I had was how Jalen Johnson was going to respond to this playoff physicality, the intensity, you know, as being the guy on the team. And look, Jalen, I think, has had a great year. He deserves to be an All-NBA player. He's going to make All-NBA third team in all likelihood. He deserved to make an All-Star team, which he did. He averaged 22 points, 10 rebounds, 8 assists on 48% shooting, 35% from 3. So Jalen Johnson had a fantastic season as the number 1 option for the Hawks. But this is the playoffs, baby. And the playoffs are different. The intensity rises. the physicality rises. And in the playoffs, teams game plan for your tendencies and weaknesses. And I'm telling y'all, when it's playoff basketball, teams they watch film of you. They watch nearly all of your games, and they know every single tendency and weakness in the book. And the teams that exploit those weaknesses, they exploit those weaknesses over and over and over and over and over until they can't exploit it no more. And that's what the playoffs are all about, man. And so whatever tendency Jalen Johnson has, the Knicks know it. They know they know it. They've gotten physical with him. They attacked his handle at times. They pushed him off his spot. They've been physical, knocking him off his drives a little bit. And Jalen Johnson, for a decent portion of this series, he just doesn't want any parts of it. And that is a problem for the Hawks in this series. Jalen Johnson has not been good for most of this series. He wasn't good in game 1, even though he had 23 points. He wasn't really good in game 2, even though he had 17 points. Now, I thought Jalen was better in game 3. I thought for nice stretches of game 3, he was more like himself. He was attacking. He was playing with physicality. He wasn't always efficient. He was 8 for 19 in that game, but he was making himself a presence offensively, getting to the free throw line 10 times. And he had 24, 10, and 8 in that game. Well, and he had some nice little plays defensively in that game. So I thought game 3 was Jalen's best game, even if he wasn't perfect. Even in that game, he had some little errors. But game 4 was his worst game yet. 14 points, 3 rebounds, 3. And but only the 5 assists on 4-12 shooting. And to me, the playoffs for Jalen Johnson, and like for me with Jalen Johnson's struggles in these playoffs is a perfect example as to why I wanted the Atlanta Hawks to make the playoffs. And it's because for Jalen Johnson to grow as a player, and for Jalen Johnson, because let's just be honest, Jalen Johnson and Dyson Daniels, specifically those two, and you want to add in the Alexander Walker, you want to add in Jonathan Kuminga, fine. You can add those two, you add those guys, but specifically for Jalen Johnson, the playoffs, to me, he needed to make the playoffs because Jalen Johnson needs to experience these struggles. He needs to experience these growing pains. Because I knew coming into this series against the New York Knicks that Jalen Johnson was going to have some growing pains because this is all new to him. The intensity and the physicality levels up in the playoffs. And, for Jalen Johnson, the only way for him to grow as a basketball player is for him to experience this type of stuff, to experience these lowlights and these struggles. Has it been frustrating as a fan? Yeah, absolutely it has been. I'm frustrated watching Jalen Johnson in these playoffs. But this is best for Jalen Johnson in the long run because he needed this. And if Jalen Johnson was not going to make the playoffs, there was no way that he was going to get better as a basketball player. These struggles for Jalen Johnson is going to elevate him moving forward into the future, for years to come. But unfortunately to the Hawks, he's going through these growing pains right now, and we're kind of seeing it. Him being passive, him shying away from physicality, him struggling shooting the ball the way he has at times, him struggling finishing at the basket the way he has at times, him passing up on shots. When he's taking shots, he's not making them. Like, it's been a whirlwind for Jalen Johnson in these playoffs. And for the Hawks' sake, look, this series is only tied at 2-2. And so there's plenty of time for Jalen Johnson to redeem himself. But make no mistake about it, for this team to win this series, Jalen Johnson is going to have to step up. He's going to have to be awesome, or at least close to it, for the Hawks to win this series. And the Hawks have 2 chances at minimum. They have 2 chances, to redeem themselves, for Jalen Johnson to step it up, and he just has to be better, and not just offensively, but defensively as well. Just he's getting beat off back cuts. He's missing box outs. He's not closing out strong. You know, it's like his attention to detail is lacking at times. It's not. In game 4, he wasn't consistently locked in, and that's kind of been the frustrating aspect of Jalen Johnson. And so it just hasn't been good enough. And I think what's also been startling to me in this series for the Hawks is just how reliant this team's been on CJ McCollum to score in the half court. CJ McCollum's been awesome in this series. He has been awesome, averaging over 25 points a game in this series. And so I want to give CJ McCollum some credit for how well he's been playing. But CJ McCollum's also 34 years old. And so you can't really depend on him to this degree. And so you're gonna have to help him out, man. And Jalen Johnson, again, it's on him. Everyone else is also everybody else on the team is at their struggles as well. Dyson Daniels, it felt like Dyson Daniels, and it felt like his offensive limitations was hurting the team. I think the Knicks also did a nice job of letting the iffy shooters shoot the ball, along with Dyson. Kuminga shot the ball 6 times from 3. Jalen shot the ball, I want to say, 5 times from 3. Mo Gay even had a couple of shot attempts from 3. And so the Knicks were daring them to shoot, and the Hawks just weren't making them pay. And I think for the Hawks moving forward, at least one of Kuminga and Jalen Johnson is going to have to get hot from 3 and make the Knicks pay for leaving them open. And also for Kuminga, he's got to be more. To me, I thought he settled a little bit too much in this game. He settled for too many threes when he should have been attacking the basket more. And so then, good luck, man. Give the Knicks credit. They made a lot of adjustments. They were physical on the Hawks ball handlers. The Hawks turned the ball over 19 times. CJ McCollum, Nikhil, Dyson, Jalen, everybody was struggling with handling the ball. Josh Hart was getting a lot of steals, active defensively. OG Anunoby, active defensively. And so give the Knicks credit. They were active defensively, and they played with more urgency than the Hawks did. And the Hawks just weren't ready for it. But yeah, man, like Jalen Johnson, again, to me, if the Hawks want to have a chance in this series against the New York Knicks, he's gonna have to step up and just be more aggressive and just play with more force and physicality. Play like you want it. And look, I know it's hard, because Jalen Johnson, this is new to him. But he's got to be better. He's got to be better than this. He's got to be better. If he had 14 points on 4 of 12 shooting in game 4. If Jalen Johnson is going to average 14 points a game, the Atlanta Hawks are going to go home in 6 games. The season is going to end on Thursday. If the Jalen Johnson we got in game 4 is going to be the Jalen Johnson we get moving forward. So Jalen Johnson is going to have to play better. He's going to have to play better. He's going to have to be more aggressive. He's going to hunt. He's going to have to hunt his shot more. He's going to have to be more confident into this mid-range game the way that we saw in the regular season. And he just has to fight back with the physicality that OG Anunoby and Josh Hart are giving to him. He's going to have to fight back and step up. And he's talented. He's a talented dude. But the mentality has to be there. It's just kind of the way it is. And so, look, a lot of these guys, everyone else is going to have to play better as well. Nikhil Alexander Walker, he's going to have to do a better job of being more aggressive, and continue to make threes and finishing at the basket and making better decisions and passing. CJ McCollum, he's going to have to not turn the ball over. Dyson Daniels, he's going to have to be more, he's going to have to not be scared going to the basket. And to me, look, if the Knicks are going to play, if they're going to put Jalen Brunson on Dyson Daniels, which is what the Knicks did in game 4, set more screens. Set more screens when Jalen Johnson or CJ McCollum has the ball, and put Jalen Brunson on whoever the ball handler is. That's something that, that Dyson Daniels did an awesome job all year. It's why he was able to offset his lack of shooting when teams were putting centers on him, because he was setting screens and rolling to the basket, right? And so the Hawks are going to have to get back to doing things like that. Dyson Daniels setting more screens and attacking the basket. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, being more aggressive. Jalen Johnson, specifically him, being more aggressive. And Jonathan Kuminga. Jonathan Kuminga, when the games that Jonathan Kuminga has been great, the Hawks have won. The games that he has not been good in, the Hawks have lost. He had 10 points on 3 out of 10 shooting in game 4. He had 19 points in game, 2? And he had 21 in game 3. Or it might be flip-flopping, I don't know. But he was really good in games 2 and 3. As a scoring threat. And so you're going to have to get more out of him as well, man. But it starts with Jalen Johnson for me when it comes to the Hawks. Like, it just does. And for the Knicks, look, man, give them credit. They stepped up. The defense and offensively, you kind of saw them kind of deviate away from Jalen Brunson, leaning on him and running the offense to Karl-Anthony Towns. Karl-Anthony Towns was finding cutters and shooters all game long. OG Anunoby and Josh Hart were going to the basket. He was driving to the basket, and he was finding Jalen Brunson from open threes and Miles McBride for open threes. And even OG for a three. And he was getting to the basket, scoring in the paint, getting rebounds. Karl-Anthony Towns was outstanding. And when the Knicks involve him, the Hawks don't really have an answer for it. And so I think for the Hawks, I think when the Hawks go through Cat, when Cat is driving to the basket, the Hawks are going to have to get steals, be more attentive on his drives. I think I read a stat where during the course of the regular season, Karl-Anthony Towns led the league in offensive fouls. And so, for the Hawks, that Cat has a tendency to get a little bit out of control in his drives. When he's driving to the basket, rotate him again and set yourself up to draw a charge. You can't be afraid to lay your body out on the line when Cat is driving to the basket. And so that's something they're going to get better at as well. And so the Hawks got to clear him a lot of stuff. I think the Knicks understand that this isn't the series for Jalen Brunson. And by the way, credit Dyson Daniels. He's been struggling offensively. Defensively, he's done an incredible job on Jalen Brunson. He has not allowed that man to breathe. With his offense, he's shooting 38% from the field in this series, and that's all and most to do to Dyson Daniels and his defense. And so the Knicks are understanding that this isn't a series for Jalen Brunson, and that they're making life hard on him. And so they're leaning towards running the offense to Cat. And in game 4, it worked. And for the Hawks, they're going to have to respond. They're going to have to respond with how they're playing Karl-Anthony Towns and not making things too easy for him. And that's just kind of where it is right now. But look, man, for the Hawks to have a chance in this series, Jalen Johnson's going to have to step up, man. To me, it starts with him. CJ McCollum's done his thing. Jonathan Kuminga, I think is gonna look. I think Jonathan Kuminga is gonna be aggressive, but Jalen Johnson, man, we need you. The Atlanta Hawks need you. He's gonna have to be aggressive. He's gonna have to be more forceful. But look, I get it. It's growing pains for him, but man, the Hawks have a chance in this series. If the Hawks have a chance, man, this 2-2. This series is tied at 2-2. If you would have told the Hawks before this series started that this series would be tied at 2-2, they would take it. CJ McCollum said in this press conference yesterday that if you would have told us it would be tied at 2-2, I'll take it. And so the Hawks have a chance in this series. And for them to have a chance of winning the series, Jalen Johnson is going to have to come through, man. Like it's just what it is. He's going to have to come through. He's going to have to be aggressive. He's going to have to play with more force. He's going to have to be confident in his mid-range shot. He's going to have to be confident shooting the ball. He's going to have to be more aggressive and forceful. And, we'll see what happens, man. We'll see what adjustments the Hawks make. Uh, Credit the Knicks. They won game 4. They deserve it. But it's on the Hawks to make the next adjustment. And for me, at least, it starts with Jalen Johnson stepping up and playing better and playing like he wants it. And we'll see if he does. But that's all I have, and I'll get back to y'all soon to catch you guys in the next episode. Talk soon. Peace.